While cleaning a locker, a janitor finds a photo with someone who was supposed to be dead. The ammonia bit into the back of Arthur's throat, a familiar, acrid sting that had become the scent of his life. It was the smell of other people's grime, of endings, of forgotten things. At 55, his world had shrunk to the dimensions of a mop bucket and the lonely echo of his footsteps in the cavernous sleeping halls of Northwood University. Tonight, it was the West Wing, 3rd floor, the philosophy department. He found it ironic, cleaning the filth left by students who spent their days pondering the nature of existence while he was slowly being erased by his own. The final task of the night, of the semester, was always the lockers, a row of silent metal mouths, sealed with the indifference of youth. The email from facilities was curt: all remaining items in lockers 335-03400. To be cleared and disposed of by June 1st, no exceptions. It was May 31st. Arthur was, as always, just on time and completely invisible. He worked his way down the line, the master key turning with a satisfying clunk in most of the locks. Inside, a predictable archaeology of student life, crumpled exam papers, bleeding blue ink, petrified granola bars, a single sock, a textbook on Kant with a phallus drawn on the philosopher's forehead. He swept the pathetic contents into his industrial-sized garbage bag, a black plastic maw that swallowed the remnants of bright futures and expensive educations. It was a ritual of erasure he performed every year, a quiet funeral for abandoned ambitions. He reached locker 3371. The key went in but wouldn't turn, rusted shut. He grunted, jiggling it, the sound metallic and sharp in the profound silence. Nothing, he sighed. The sound of a man whose entire life was a series of small, unyielding frustrations. He reached for the crowbar on his cart. It was against the rules, but the rules were written by people who had never had to deal with a rusted lock at 2 a.m. The metal shrieked in protest. As he wedged the tip of the crowbar into the seam, he put his weight into it, his shoulder groaning. The muscles in his back worn thin from decades of this work. Screaming, with a final violent crack, the lock broke, and the locker door sprang open, exhaling a decade's worth of stale trapped air. The smell was different. Not of old food or forgotten gym clothes, but of dust and something else. Something like paper and time and loss. The contents were sparse. A single thick textbook, advanced chemistry, a dried-out pen, and a small rectangular object lying face down on the metal shelf. It was a photograph. 4x6, its edges were curled, the back a faded, jaundiced yellow. Arthur reached in, his calloused fingers closing around it. He was just going to sweep it into the bag with the rest of the debris. It was junk. They were all just pieces of junk. But he paused. Something made him turn it over, and the world stopped. The fluorescent lights of the hallway seemed to dim. The hum they made, a sound so constant he usually didn't even hear it, suddenly roared in his ears like a jet engine. His breath hitched, a painful tearing sound in his chest. His heart, which had been beating in a slow, tired rhythm, gave a violent lurch. Then began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic prisoner demanding to be set free. It was her, it was Lily, his Lily. 10 years. 10 years since he had seen that smile, not in person, anyway. He saw it every night in his dreams. The same torturous loop of her waving from the dock, her hair a halo of gold in the late afternoon sun. He saw it in the framed photo on his nightstand, the last one ever taken, her graduation picture from high school, full of a hope that now seemed like a cruel joke. But this photo, this was different. He had never seen it before. She was younger, maybe 18, a freshman here at this very university. She was laughing, her head thrown back. Her teeth, a perfect, bright white, but her eyes, his daughter's eyes, the same deep cobalt blue as his own. They held something else. It wasn't the pure, uncomplicated joy of the girl in his memories. It was a joy edged with something sharp, something frantic. A shadow flickered in their depths, a darkness that had no place on the face of his child. She was standing in front of a building he didn't recognize, An old stone facade with ivy crawling up the walls and a heavy oak door. It wasn't a building on the Northwood campus. He knew every brick, every cornerstone of this place. This was somewhere else. And she wasn't alone. The edge of her shoulder was visible in the frame, a man's shoulder in a dark blazer. The photo had been cropped, or perhaps the person taking it had been careless. But the presence of someone else was unmistakable. His hand was trembling so badly, the image of his daughter blurred into a smear of color and light. He had to steady himself against the cold metal of the lockers, the ammonia smell suddenly suffocating. A wave of dizziness washed over him. Lily here, in a locker that had been rusted shut for who knows how long. A locker that should have been empty. The official story. The one delivered by a pair of uniformed officers with pitying eyes and rehearsed lines, was an accident. A tragic, unthinkable accident. The university's annual freshman retreat at Black Lake. She'd gone for a swim late at night with some friends. They'd been drinking. She was a strong swimmer, a champion on her high school team. But the cold water, the alcohol, a fatal combination. They found her body 2 days later. Case closed. A simple, brutal narrative that had cleaved his life in two. His wife, Eleanor, had never recovered. She had faded, a photograph left out in the sun, until 3 years ago, when a quiet overdose had finally reunited her with the daughter she could not live without. But Arthur had lived. He had stayed, taking this job at the university she had so briefly attended, a form of self-flagellation, a way to walk the same paths, to breathe the same air. He was a ghost, haunting the edges of her memory. A janitor in the ivory tower that had swallowed his only child. He never believed it. Not really. In the deepest, most secret part of his heart, the part that still screamed in the lonely hours of the night, he knew it was a lie. Lily didn't take risks. She was terrified of deep water, a fear she had confessed to him once, as a child after watching a movie. A champion swimmer, yes, but only in the bright, clean, predictable lanes of a swimming pool. Never in a dark, murky lake at night, and she barely drank. She hated the taste, the loss of control. He ran his thumb over the surface of the photograph. A desperate, tender gesture. It felt like sacrilege. His grimy, work-worn thumb on her perfect, smiling face. He forced his eyes to focus, to look past the agony and see the details. The way her hand was clenched by her side, the knuckles white. The slight, almost imperceptible tension in her jaw, even as she laughed. It was a performance. A beautiful, desperate performance. He turned the photo over. His blood ran cold. Scrawled on the back in a messy, panicked script, in the familiar loop of his daughter's own handwriting, was a single word, "run." The word was a gunshot in the silent hallway. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a plea, a command, a scream trapped in ink. Run. From what? From whom? From the person with the shoulder in the dark blazer. From the person holding the camera. 1,000 questions, 1,000 dormant suspicions, erupted in his mind, a violent, chaotic storm. The dismissive campus police. The university chancellor, a man with eyes like polished stones, who had spoken at the memorial about the tragic recklessness of youth. While patting Arthur's shoulder in a gesture of condescending finality, the friends who were with her that night, a group of wealthy legacy students who had closed ranks, their stories smooth, polished, and identical. They were all so sorry. It was just a terrible, terrible accident. He looked at the locker number again. 3,371. Who did it belong to? A student who had been here a decade ago? Someone who knew Lily? Someone who had kept this picture, this warning, hidden away behind a wall of rust and silence? He felt a sudden primal urge to protect the photograph, to shield it from the world. It was a piece of her, a final secret message that had taken 10 years to find him. It was proof. Proof of what? He didn't know, but it was proof that his grief, his gnawing, unrelenting doubt, was not the madness of a broken father. It was real. He carefully, reverently, slipped the photograph into the breast pocket of his work shirt, the thin paper pressing against his chest. Right over his frantic, hammering heart, it felt like a live coal, a burning ember of truth in the cold emptiness of his life. And that's when he heard it. A sound, down the long cavernous stretch of the hallway, around the corner where the corridor bent towards the main stairwell. Footstep, slow, heavy, deliberate. The sound of a leather-soled shoe on polished linoleum. Arthur froze. Every muscle in his body locking tight. He was alone. He had locked the main entrance himself an hour ago. The only other person in the building was the security guard, Frank, and he was stationed in the security office in the north wing, a 5-minute walk away. Frank never did rounds. He watched Netflix on his monitor and waited for his shift to end. Thump. Another footstep, closer this time. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than before. It was a listening silence. A waiting silence. Arthur's senses, dulled by years of monotonous routine, suddenly screamed to life. He could smell the floor wax, the chalk dust, the old paper of the books lining the professor's offices. He could see the way the fluorescent light flickered over the water fountain, making the chrome gleam like a predator's tooth. He flattened himself against the bank of lockers, trying to make his large frame smaller, trying to melt into the shadows. His heart was a drum beating, a rhythm of pure terror. He held his breath, straining to hear, to understand. Was it just the building settling? An echo from another floor? Thump, no. It was real, and it was getting closer. Someone was walking down the hallway, slowly, methodically, like they were hunting, like they knew he was there. He slid his eyes towards the end of the corridor. The corner was about 50 feet away. In the dim, sterile light, it was a maw of darkness, an entrance to the unknown. The footsteps had stopped, but the presence was still there. He could feel it. A cold, heavy weight in the air, a shift in the atmosphere. The feeling of being watched. His mind raced. Who could it be? A student who had stayed behind, a professor working late. But they would have turned on lights, made noise. This was different. This was stealth. This was intent. He thought of the photograph in his pocket. Run. Was this what she was running from? Had it come back? Had opening this locker, this tomb of secrets, somehow summoned it? The thought was insane, the product of a shocked and grieving mind, but in the terrifying absolute silence of the hallway, it felt chillingly plausible. He was trapped. The stairwell was past the corner. The only other way out was the fire escape at the far end of the hall, 100 feet in the opposite direction. He would be completely exposed. He stayed perfectly still, his back pressed against the cold metal. The broken locker door still hanging open like a silent scream. He strained his ears, listening for any sound, a cough, a shuffle. The jingle of keys. Nothing. Only the low, incessant hum of the lights above. Minutes stretched into an eternity. His lungs burned for air. His muscles began to cramp. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with menace, with the terrifying certainty that he was not alone. The person was there, just around the corner, waiting for him to move. To reveal himself, he had to do something. He couldn't stay here all night, paralyzed by fear. He was a janitor, a ghost. He was supposed to be invisible. Maybe they hadn't seen him. Maybe if he was quiet, if he just continued his work, they would pass by. Slowly, trying to make his movements seem natural, he reached for the garbage bag on his cart. His hand shook uncontrollably. He fumbled with the plastic, the crinkling sound deafeningly loud in the stillness. He swept the textbook and the pen from the open locker into the bag. He left the photo in his pocket. He closed the broken locker door. It wouldn't latch, but he pushed it shut, the metal groaning softly. He took a breath, then another, trying to steady his nerves. He was just a janitor finishing his shift. That's all. He gripped the handle of his cart, the plastic cool and slick beneath his sweaty palm. He would walk. He would walk towards the corner, towards the stairwell, towards the sound. He would act like he belonged there, like nothing was wrong. He would look straight ahead and walk right past whatever, whoever, was waiting there. He took a step. The rubber soles of his work boots squeaking on the floor. The sound was an explosion. And from around the corner, a voice spoke. A voice that was calm, cultured, and dripping with a chilling, almost bored authority. Leaving so soon, Arthur, the name, he knew his name. Arthur's blood turned to ice. He looked up. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the corner, blocking the path to the stairs. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark tailored suit that seemed out of place in the dead of night. His face was obscured by the poor lighting, but Arthur could see the glint of expensive shoes, the sharp crease of his trousers. It was a silhouette of power and privilege. "I found your crowbar," the man said, his voice echoing slightly in the long hall. He held it up. It looked like a toy in his hand. "Facilities management really should provide you with better tools for these old lockers. It's an issue of workplace safety, don't you think?" The man took a step forward, and the light caught his face. Arthur felt the last of the air leave his lungs. He knew that face. He had seen it 100 times, on the university's website, in the alumni magazine. On the bronze plaque in the main lobby, it was Chancellor Thompson, the man who had given the eulogy at his daughter's memorial. The man with the eyes like polished stones, and in those eyes right now, there was no pity. There was no condescension. There was only a cold, flat, terrifying emptiness. It was the look of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. A man who saw other people not as human beings, but as problems to be solved. As messes to be cleaned up. And Arthur, the janitor, suddenly understood with sickening clarity that he was the mess the Chancellor had come to clean up tonight. The 10 years since, Lily's death had been a study in the color gray. Gray mornings, gray meals eaten alone in his gray apartment, the gray stubble on his chin that he sometimes forgot to shave. Arthur had cultivated a life of quiet, unobtrusive sorrow. He did his job, he collected his paycheck, and he waited for his own end, an end he assumed would be as quiet and unnoticed as his existence. He was a man who had learned not to ask questions, because the one question that mattered, what really happened to my daughter, was a door he was too terrified to open, for fear that there would be nothing behind it but his own madness. Now, that door had been kicked open, and standing on the threshold was the very man who had helped seal it shut. Chancellor Alastair Thompson. He wasn't just the head of the university, he was the university's family's name was carved into the stone of the library. Their money, the bedrock upon which this ivory tower was built. He moved through the world with the frictionless ease of a man who had never been told no. Arthur Thompson repeated, his voice a low, smooth purr that did nothing to conceal the steel beneath it. "You're working very late. Commendable dedication." He took another step, the sound of his footsteps precise and confident. He stopped about 20 feet away, a predator assessing its prey. Arthur's throat was a knot of sandpaper and fear. He tried to speak, but only a dry croak emerged. He cleared his throat. "Chancellor," he managed, his own voice sounding alien and thin. "Just finishing up. The lockers are yes." "The lockers," Thompson said, a thin, humorless smile touching his lips. He gestured with the crowbar. "And you found one that was a bit stubborn. Number 3371, wasn't it?" The question was not a question. It was a statement. A confirmation. He knew which locker. A cold dread, sharp and painful, pierced through Arthur's terror. This wasn't a chance encounter. Thompson hadn't just happened to be taking a late-night stroll. He had come here for a reason. For that locker. It was rusted, Arthur said, his mind scrambling, searching for a life raft of normalcy in a sea of sudden horror had to force it. "I see," Thompson said, his eyes, a pale washed-out blue, flicking from Arthur's face to the open locker door, and back again. They were intelligent eyes, but they were devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a biologist studying an insect. "And what did we find inside? Anything of interest?" "Forgotten treasures." The casual, almost playful tone was the most terrifying thing of all. It was a cat-and-mouse game, and Arthur was painfully aware of his role. The photo in his pocket felt like it was burning a hole through his shirt, a brand marking him for death. He had to lie. His life, he suddenly realized, depended on his ability to lie to this man. "No sir, nothing, just an old book, some trash." He gestured to the black garbage bag on his cart, praying the gesture looked casual, dismissive. Cleared out now. Thompson tilted his head, a gesture of mock consideration. Nothing? Are you sure? Sometimes things get tucked away. A letter, a keepsake, a photograph perhaps. He said the word photograph with a delicate, deliberate emphasis. That made the hairs on Arthur's arms stand on end. He knew exactly what was in the locker. He had come for it. And Arthur had gotten to it first. The hallway, which had felt vast and empty moments before, now felt claustrophobically small. A stage set for a final, terrible act. The power imbalance was absolute. Arthur was a janitor with a crowbar and a secret. Thompson was a man who could make people disappear with a phone call. A man whose very presence screamed of untouchable power. The injustice of it all, the raw, searing injustice that had simmered in Arthur's gut for a decade, began to boil over. Eclipsing his fear with a hot, reckless rage, this man, this smooth, polished, soulless man, had stood before him and his weeping wife and spoken of tragedy, of God's mysterious ways. He had offered condolences and platitudes while knowing what did he know? Just a book, Arthur repeated, his voice firmer this time, hardened by the anger that was now coursing through his veins. Thompson's smile faded. The mask of civility dropped, and for a second, Arthur saw the thing that lived behind it. Cold, ruthless, and utterly impatient. Don't play games with me, Arthur. You are a janitor. You are a simple man. You are in a world you cannot possibly comprehend. Give me the photograph. It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered with the casual authority of a king to a peasant. The rage in Arthur's chest solidified into something hard and defiant. For 10 years, he had been a simple, grieving man. He had been invisible. But in this moment, holding the last message his daughter ever wrote, he was not invisible. He was a father, and he would not be managed. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice low and steady. He met the Chancellor's gaze, and for the first time in a decade, he did not look away. Thompson's eyes narrowed. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, and then another. He was closing the distance, his movements fluid and predatory. I know about your daughter, Arthur. I know you've carried this grief, this suspicion. You've been looking for answers in the bottom of a bottle for 10 years, but you are mistaken. It was an accident, a sad, unfortunate accident. Some things are better left buried. Like a photograph in a rusted locker. The words were out of Arthur's mouth before he could stop them. They were reckless. They were suicidal. But they were true. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Thompson's face, quickly replaced by annoyance. You are more clever than you look. But cleverness is not a virtue in your position. It is a liability. He stopped just a few feet away. The air crackled with tension. The photograph is university property. It was left in a locker on our grounds. It belongs to me. Now, hand it over, and you can walk out of here and go back to your miserable, empty life. We will forget this conversation ever happened. The threat was clear, hanging in the air between them, as sharp and as real as the crowbar Thompson still held. Give it to me, or you won't walk out of here at all. Arthur's hand instinctively went to his chest, to the pocket where the photo was hidden. It was a small, foolish, giveaway gesture, and he knew it the second he did it. Thompson's eyes locked onto the movement. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. There it is, he said softly, almost to himself. I should have known. A sentimental man. He took the final step, closing the space between them. He was taller than Arthur, his frame casting a long, menacing shadow. He smelled of expensive cologne and something else, something cold and metallic, like old money and buried secrets. Last chance, Arthur, Thompson whispered, his voice a venomous hiss. Give it to me. Arthur looked into the Chancellor's dead blue eyes, and he saw the truth. There was no walking away. There was no forgetting. He had seen something he was not meant to see. He knew something he was not meant to know. He was a loose end, a piece of trash to be disposed of. He thought of Lily, her laugh, her fear-filled eyes, the single, desperate word she had left for him. Run. He wasn't going to run. Not anymore. with a guttural roar that was part grief, part rage, and part pure animal terror. Arthur shoved his cleaning cart with all his might. It flew forward, the buckets of dirty water sloshing, the bottles of chemicals rattling, and slammed directly into Chancellor Thompson's legs. Thompson cried out, a sound of shock and pain, as he stumbled backward. His perfect suit now splashed with filthy water. The crowbar clattered to the floor. It was the opening Arthur needed. He didn't run towards the stairwell, where Thompson now stood between him and the exit. He turned and ran the other way, down the long, empty corridor. His work boots pounding on the linoleum, his heart threatening to explode from his chest. He ran towards the fire escape. He ran for his life. Behind him, he heard Thompson shout, his voice no longer smooth and cultured, but a raw, furious snarl. "You're a dead man, Arthur, a dead man." Arthur didn't look back. He just ran. The word his daughter had written for him echoing in his head, a frantic, desperate mantra: run, run, run. The fire escape door was heavy, reinforced steel, and for a terrifying second, Arthur thought it was locked. He slammed his shoulder into the push bar, grunting with the effort, his panic rising like bile in his throat. With a groaning screech of rusted hinges, it flew open, revealing the cool, damp night air and the dizzying drop to the alley 3 stories below. He scrambled out onto the narrow metal platform, the grid of the floor cold and unforgiving beneath his feet. The city lights spread out before him, a glittering, indifferent tapestry. He risked a glance back down the hallway. Thompson was already on his feet, his suit stained, his face a mask of incandescent rage. He was coming, his long strides eating up the distance between them. Arthur didn't hesitate. He swung his leg over the railing and started clambering down the steep, rickety fire escape ladder, his hands slipping on the cold, damp metal. Each step was a jarring impact, his old knees screaming in protest. The alley below was dark, filled with dumpsters and shadows. A labyrinth of urban decay. He heard the clang of the fire escape door being thrown open above him. The sound of expensive leather shoes on the metal platform. "You can't run from me." Thompson's voice echoed in the narrow canyon of the alley. "There is nowhere you can go." Arthur dropped the last 10 feet, landing hard, a sharp, stabbing pain shooting up from his ankle. He ignored it, adrenaline and terror his only fuel. He scrambled to his feet and limped into the darkness of the alley, a rat fleeing into the sewer. He could hear Thompson descending the ladder, faster, more agile than Arthur would have guessed. He ducked behind a large, overflowing dumpster, the stench of rotting garbage filling his nostrils. He pressed himself against the cold, grimy brick wall, trying to control his ragged, desperate breaths. His heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of his chest. His ankle throbbed with a white-hot pain. He clutched the photograph in his pocket, the sharp edges digging into his palm. It was the only thing that mattered now. He peered around the edge of the dumpster. Thompson had reached the bottom of the fire escape. He stood there for a moment, his silhouette a dark, menacing shape against the faint glow of the streetlights. At the alley's entrance, he scanned the darkness, his head turning slowly from side to side. He was listening, hunting. "Arthur," he called out, his voice calm again. The cultured smoothness returning, but now it was laced with something more sinister. Like a snake oil salesman promising salvation. "Let's be reasonable. This is a simple misunderstanding. You're upset? I understand that. But you have something that doesn't belong to you. It's a private matter, a family matter. You wouldn't want to interfere in a private family matter, would you?" Family matter. What was he talking about? Whose family? Arthur stayed silent, his body rigid with tension. He knew it was a trap, a lie, designed to lure him out. Thompson sighed, a sound of theatrical disappointment. "Very well," he said, his voice dropping, losing its persuasive edge and becoming flat and cold. "Have it your way." He reached into his suit jacket. For a horrifying moment, Arthur thought he was pulling out a gun. Instead, he pulled out a cell phone. He tapped the screen a few times, then lifted it to his ear. "It's me," Thompson said into the phone, his voice low but carrying clearly in the quiet alley. "We have a situation at the West Wing. Yes, the janitor. He's become problematic. He found something. No, I don't have it. He ran. I need a cleanup crew. And call Marcus. Tell him the old ghost has come back to haunt us. Tell him to initiate the protocol. No questions, just do it now. He hung up. He stood there for another moment, a statue of dark intent, before turning and walking calmly out of the alley, disappearing onto the street as if nothing had happened. He didn't even look back. He didn't have to. The cleanup crew was on its way. The protocol had been initiated. Arthur leaned his head back against the filthy brick, a wave of nausea and terror washing over him. This was bigger than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just Thompson. There were others. Marcus, the protocol. The old ghost was Lily the ghost. He was no longer just a grieving father who had stumbled upon a clue. He was a witness, a target, a man marked for erasure. He looked down at his janitor's uniform, at his dirt-caked hands, at his worn-out life. Who would believe him? A janitor against a chancellor. A drunk, as Thompson had called him, against one of the most powerful men in the city. He had to get out of there. He pushed himself off the wall, his injured ankle screaming in protest. He limped deeper into the alley, away from the street, towards the labyrinth of darkness behind the university. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he had to disappear. He clutched the photograph in his pocket. The last, desperate message from his daughter. It was a clue. It was a condemnation. And now, it was his death warrant. He looked back one last time at the ivory tower of Northwood University, its spires reaching for the sky like skeletal fingers. It wasn't a place of learning, it was a tomb, and it had been waiting 10 years to claim its next victim. The next few hours were a blur of pain and panic. Arthur moved through the city's underbelly, a ghost in his own right, sticking to the shadows. His heart leaping at every passing car, every distant siren. His ankle was a swollen, throbbing knot of agony, forcing him into a grotesque, limping gait. He was a creature of the night, his janitor's uniform a pathetic camouflage in the urban wilderness. He thought about going to the police, but Thompson's voice echoed in his head. Call Marcus. Initiate the protocol. How deep did this go? Who was Marcus? Were the police part of it? The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through his veins. He was alone, utterly and completely alone. His mind, a frantic machine, kept replaying the scene. In the hallway, the look in Thompson's eyes, the casual, terrifying authority in his voice. A private family matter, he had said. Whose family? His Lily was his family. Or was it Thompson's? The Chancellor had a son, Arthur remembered from the university newsletters. A son named Julian. He was a few years older than Lily. A golden boy, captain of the debate team, heir to the Thompson dynasty. He had graduated years ago, a celebrated alumnus, now working at his father's powerful investment firm. Arthur remembered seeing him at the memorial, standing beside his father, his face a perfect mask of somber respectability. He needed a place to hide, a place to think. His small apartment was out of the question. They would be waiting for him there. He had no friends. Not really. His life had been a solitary affair since Eleanor died. His world had been work, home, and the liquor store on the corner. A pathetic, lonely triangle dot. Then he thought of Eleanor. He thought of her sister, Maria. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Eleanor's funeral. Maria had blamed him, in her quiet, cutting way. She said he had let Eleanor waste away, that he had drowned his own grief in a bottle, and left his wife to drown in hers. She wasn't wrong. The guilt was a familiar weight, a cloak he always wore. But Maria had loved Lily, fiercely, and she hated the world of privilege that Northwood represented. A world she felt had corrupted and killed her niece. It was a long shot, a desperate, pathetic plea. But it was the only one he had. Maria lived 2 towns over, in a small working-class house that was the complete antithesis of Northwood's Gothic grandeur. It took him 3 hours to get there, a painful, limping journey that involved cutting through parks, hiding in darkened doorways, and one terrifying, heart-stopping moment when a police car had cruised slowly down a street he was about to cross. He had flattened himself behind a hedge, his breath held until it passed. He arrived at her house just as the first faint hint of dawn was bruising the eastern sky. The house was dark, the curtains drawn. He hesitated on the sidewalk, the old shame, the old guilt, rising up to choke him. What if she slammed the door in his face? What if she called the cops on him, a strange, disheveled man lurking in her driveway before sunrise? He had no choice. He limped up the cracked concrete path and knocked on the door, his knuckles rapping softly. A beggar's knock. He waited. Nothing. He knocked again, a little louder this time. A light flicked on inside. He heard the shuffle of footsteps, the metallic click of a chain being undone. The door opened a few inches, and Maria's face appeared in the gap. She was older, her hair streaked with more gray than he remembered, the lines around her eyes deeper, but the eyes themselves were the same, sharp, intelligent, and instantly wary. "Arthur," she said, her voice thick with sleep and disbelief. "What in God's name?" Her eyes took in his filthy uniform, his wild, terrified expression, the way he was favoring his swollen ankle. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have, Maria," he rasped, his voice cracking. "I think I have." She stared at him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face, weighing him. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the old resentment warring with a flicker of concern. Then, with a heavy sigh, she unlatched the chain. "Get in," she said, her voice sharp, but not unkind. "Before you bring the whole world's trouble to my doorstep." He stumbled inside, and she quickly shut and locked the door behind him. The house smelled of bleach and cinnamon, a clean, comforting smell that was so different from the ammonia and decay of his own life. He stood awkwardly in her small, tidy living room, feeling like a monster, a creature of filth and chaos invading her sanctuary. "Talk," she commanded, crossing her arms over her chest, "and it had better be good." He took a deep breath. His hand went to his pocket, his fingers closing around the worn 4x6 photograph. He pulled it out. His hand was shaking so badly, he could barely hold it steady. "I found this," he said, his voice trembling. "Tonight, at the university, in an old locker." He held it out to her. She took it, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. She looked down at the photograph. And the world stopped for the second time that night. Maria's face went white. A sharp, strangled gasp escaped her lips. Her hand flew to her mouth, her knuckles pressing against her teeth. Her tough, guarded expression crumbled, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock and a grief so profound it was like a physical blow. "Lily," she whispered, the name a ghost on her lips. She sank onto the sofa, her eyes glued to the image of her smiling, doomed niece. She traced the outline of Lily's face with her fingertip, a gesture of such love and longing that it broke Arthur's heart all over again. "Turn it over," he said softly. She fumbled with the photo, her hands trembling as badly as his had been. She turned it over and saw the single scrawled word, "run." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a dawning horror, 100 unspoken questions hanging in the air between them. In that moment, the years of anger and resentment, the wall of grief and blame that had separated them, dissolved into nothing. They were no longer a broken man and his accusatory sister-in-law. They were the last two people on earth who truly loved Lily, the keepers of her memory, and the inheritors of her final, terrifying secret. The long, silent war was over. A new one was just beginning. Maria's living room was a museum of a life lived simply and with care. Crocheted doilies rested on the arms of the sofa. Family photos crowded the mantelpiece, and the air was still and quiet. It was a world away from the cold, echoing corridors of Northwood. Maria placed the photograph on the coffee table with the reverence of a priest handling a holy relic. The smiling face of the dead girl seemed to fill the room, a silent, demanding presence. "Tell me everything," Maria said, her voice low and intense. She had retrieved a first aid kit and was now kneeling in front of him, her movements efficient and practiced as she examined his swollen, discolored ankle. The sharp sting of antiseptic was a grounding sensation, pulling him back from the edge of hysteria. "So he told her," He told her about the rusted locker, the shriek of the metal, the feel of the photograph in his hand. He described the look in Lily's eyes, the shadow that lurked behind her smile. He told her about the word on the back, the footsteps in the hall, and the moment he saw Chancellor Thompson step out of the shadows. His voice, at first halting and cracked, grew stronger as he spoke, fueled by a decade of suppressed rage and suspicion. He recounted every word of their conversation, the casual menace, the chilling mention of a private family matter, the phone call to Marcus, the order to initiate the protocol. Maria listened without interruption, her face a stony mask, but her hands, as she wrapped his ankle in a compression bandage, were gentle. When he finished, the room was silent, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Each tick a second stolen from them, a second bringing Thompson's cleanup crew closer. "Alistair Thompson," Maria said, her voice dripping with a venom that startled Arthur. "I knew it. I always knew it was one of them. Those people, they're not like us, Arthur. They live by different rules. They believe they are gods, and the rest of us are just insects to be crushed if we get in their way." She stood up and began to pace the small room, her movements agitated, a caged animal. "Eleanor tried to tell me, you know. In the beginning, she said things didn't add up. She called the other girls who were there that night, the ones who were Lily's friends. She spat the word like a curse. They all had the same story, word for word, like it was rehearsed, and their parents, powerful people, lawyers, judges, a congressman. They shut her down, threatened her, told her to stop harassing their grieving daughters." Arthur flinched. He remembered that time, Eleanor's frantic phone calls, her desperate attempts to find a crack in the official story. He had told her to stop. He had told her she was torturing herself, that she needed to accept it. In his own grief-addled drunken haze, he had been another voice telling her to be quiet, to let it go. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. "She found something," Maria continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She wouldn't tell me what." "She was scared. She said they were watching her. Listening to her calls, I thought it was the grief making her paranoid." Her voice broke, and for the first time, Arthur saw tears welling in her eyes. "I should have listened. My God, I should have listened to her." The two of them, a broken janitor and a grieving aunt, stood in the quiet living room, united by their shared failure, by the crushing weight of their regret. They had both let Lily down. They had let Eleanor down. "This Marcus," Arthur said, his mind latching onto the name, the one solid piece of information in a sea of terrifying unknowns. "Who is he?" "I don't know," Maria admitted, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "But Thompson's son, Julian. He was in Lily's year, wasn't he?" Arthur nodded, a few years older. "He was a senior when she was a freshman." "Lily mentioned him," Maria said, her eyes distant, searching the past. "She said he was intense, charming, but in a way that made her uncomfortable. He was part of that group, the wealthy kids, the ones who ran the place. They had a name for themselves, some stupid, arrogant club." She snapped her fingers. That's what they called themselves. Like the Roman emperors, they thought they were royalty. The Aurelians. The name sounded absurd, pretentious, but in the context of Thompson's power and the secrets of Northwood, it took on a sinister, cult-like resonance. "The photo," Arthur said, his gaze returning to the image on the table. "The building in the background. I've never seen it before." Maria picked it up again, studying it closely. "Neither have I, but it looks old. Stone, ivy, like a hunting lodge, or an old country estate." Thompson said it was a private family matter, Arthur recalled. "Maybe it's their property, a family estate." It was a possibility. A place away from the prying eyes of the university. A private kingdom where the Aurelians could reign without consequence. A place where a young girl could be taken. A place she would have to run from. A sudden, sickening thought occurred to Arthur. The locker, 3371. Who did it belong to? It had been rusted shut for years. It had to belong to a student from that time. One of the Aurelians, a friend of Lily's, or an enemy, someone who had held onto this secret, this piece of evidence, for a decade, their conscience or their fear, sealing it away. We need to find out who that locker belonged to, Maria said, her mind moving in parallel with his. And we need to find out who Marcus is, and what this protocol is. How, Arthur asked, the hopelessness of their situation, crashing down on him again. I can't go back there. They're hunting for me. We have nothing. We're nothing. No, Maria said, her voice hard as flint. She walked over to an old roll-top desk in the corner of the room and unlocked it with a small, silver key. We are not nothing. We are all she has left. She opened the desk inside. It was meticulously organized. But one drawer was locked. She opened it with a different key. She reached inside and pulled out a thick, leather-bound journal. Eleanor's, she said softly, placing it on the coffee table next to the photograph. She gave it to me a week before she died. She told me, if anything happens to me, don't let them get this. I never read it. I couldn't, it was too painful. But I think we have to read it now. The journal lay on the table between them, a Pandora's box of a dead woman's pain and secrets. Arthur stared at it, his heart pounding. Eleanor's neat, elegant handwriting on the cover seemed to shimmer in the dim light. He had failed his wife. He had failed to see the truth she was trying to show him. But now, she was speaking to them from beyond the grave. Her voice, silenced by grief and pills, was about to be heard again. Next to the journal, the photograph of their smiling, haunted Lily watched them, her eyes pleading, her final message a silent scream that filled the room, run. But they couldn't run. Not anymore. They had to turn and face the ghosts. The second player in this tragedy had just been introduced. Eleanor, the victim's mother. The hidden witness who had been silenced not just by her enemies, but by the grief and denial of the very people who loved her most. Her journal was the key dot, and as the sun began to rise, casting long, searching fingers of light into the room, Arthur knew that the long, grey decade of his life was over. The world was now black and white. Truth and lies. Life and death. And he had to choose a side. He reached out a trembling hand and opened the first page of his dead wife's diary. Eleanor's handwriting was a delicate, looping script, the kind of elegant cursive that was no longer taught in schools. But as Arthur read, he saw the script devolve. The loops grew tighter, the words more cramped, the pressure of the pen on the page more frantic, sometimes tearing through the paper. It was a perfect, heartbreaking record of a mind coming undone. The early entries were filled with a mother's ordinary grief, raw and ragged. Memories of Lily as a child, her first steps, her first day of school, the smell of her hair. Arthur had to stop, his eyes blurring with tears, the pain as fresh as it was a decade ago. Maria placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. Keep going, she urged softly. For them, he did, and slowly, the tone of the journal began to shift. The grief was still there, a constant, humming bass note of pain. But a new theme emerged. Suspicion. October 17th. Spoke to Jessica Parrish today. One of Lily's friends, the one who supposedly saw her go into the water. Her story was too smooth, too perfect, like she was reading from a script. When I pressed her, asked her what Lily was wearing, what they had been talking about just before, she stammered. She said she couldn't remember. How can you not remember? October 24th. Called the campus police again. Spoke to a detective, Miles. He was so condescending. Told me I was in denial. That it's a common stage of grief. He used the word hysterical. He said the case was closed. I wanted to scream at him. My daughter is dead, and he's treating me like a crazy woman. Arthur remembered Detective Miles, a man with a thick mustache and impatient eyes, who had looked at Arthur with a mixture of pity and annoyance. He had accepted the man's verdict. Eleanor had not. November 5th, I found her old laptop. In the back of her closet, she had a password on it. I tried everything. Her birthday, my birthday, our dog's name, nothing. But I found a piece of paper taped to the bottom. Aurelian, it must be the password. Why that word? It's the name of that club Julian Thompson was in. Lily hated them. She called them arrogant pigs. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. The Aurelian's Maria was right. November 6th, I got in. The password worked. Most of it is just schoolwork, emails to me and Arthur, photos. But there's a folder, it's hidden. I only found it by accident. It's called The Lodge. Inside, oh God, inside are photos, dozens of them. Not like the ones she sent us. These are different. They're at some kind of party, at a huge rustic stone house. The building from the photo, Arthur, it has to be. Arthur and Maria exchanged a look of dawning horror. Eleanor had seen it too. The photos are awful. Kids drinking, doing drugs. But it's more than that. The boys, Julian Thompson is there, and others from his group. They are cruel. They are humiliating some of the younger students. There's a picture of a boy, a freshman, being forced to drink something from a bottle while they all laugh. There's a picture of a girl, crying in a corner, while Julian whispers something in her ear. He looks like a predator, and Lily is in some of the pictures. She's on the edge of the group, watching. She doesn't look like she's having fun. She looks terrified. She looks like a prisoner. November 9th, there's a video. It's short, shaky. It looks like it was filmed in secret. It's dark, but you can hear voices. It's Julian Thompson, and his father, the Chancellor. They're arguing. Julian is yelling. He says, she knows. The little bitch knows everything. She's going to ruin us, and the Chancellor. His voice is so cold. He says, then you will handle it. It's your mess, Julian. You will clean it up. The family must be protected at all costs. Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. He felt sick. He felt like he was going to vomit. It was all there. A conspiracy, a cover-up, not just a tragic accident, but a murder. A murder orchestrated to protect the golden son of the university's most powerful family. November 15th, I went to the police. I took the laptop. I showed Detective Miles the video. He watched it. His face didn't change. He told me the audio was garbled, that it could be anyone. He said the photos just showed kids being kids. He told me I was harassing the Thompson family. He said if I didn't stop, they would file a restraining order. He gave me the laptop back and told me to go home and mourn my daughter. The injustice of it was a physical blow. The police were in on it. Miles was not just dismissive. He was part of the cover-up. He was protecting them. The final entries of the journal were almost illegible. The words scrawled across the page in a desperate, terrified frenzy. December 1st. They're watching the house. A black car. It's parked at the end of the street every day. It's always there. I'm not crazy. I'm not. December 5th. My phone is making strange noises, clicking sounds. They're listening. I know they are. I gave the journal to Maria today. Told her to keep it safe. She thinks I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am, but I know what I saw. I know what they did to my baby. December 10th. I can't sleep. I see his face every time I close my eyes. Julian's and his father's, the same cold, dead eyes. They're going to come for me. I know it. I can't let them get me. I have to be with Lily. It's the only way to be safe. The only way to be free. Forgive me, Arthur. Forgive me. That was the last entry. Arthur closed the journal, his hands shaking. The story of his wife's final months was not one of a woman succumbing to grief. It was the story of a witness being systematically silenced, intimidated, and gaslighted until she saw no other way out. Her suicide was not a choice. It was a murder, as surely as Lily's had been. He looked up at Maria. Her face was a pale, tear-streaked mask of fury. They killed them both, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. They killed my sister. And they killed my niece. The photograph on the table was no longer just a picture of Lily. It was a picture of Eleanor too. It was a testament to their fight, a fight that had cost them everything. The hidden witness was hidden no more. Her testimony, written in her own blood and tears, was finally being heard. And Arthur, the janitor, the drunk. The grieving father, who had been too blind and too broken to see the truth, was now the last witness left standing. The weight of both their lives, both their stories, now rested on his weary, stooped shoulders. He looked at the journal, at the photograph, at his sister-in-law's determined, furious face. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in his stomach. But it was now mixed with something else, a burning, righteous fire. A fire that had been lit by a dead girl's plea and fanned into a raging inferno by a dead woman's diary. He was not going to run. He was going to burn them to the ground.